My name is Nuri Mercer. I'm 28, First Lieutenant, United States Army. My grandma was an Army nurse. No medals, no records. She lived poor, died the same way. A small house on the east side of Richmond, a vegetable garden, hand-brewed coffee, and nothing in the bank. That's what everybody believed. At Arlington, it was just me. No family, no flowers except mine. 80 white headstones of nurses standing in rows like a formation nobody dismissed. A 4-star general walked up. He shook my hand. "Fly to Geneva," he said. "Give them your grandmother's name. They'll understand." They understood. And what I found there, $12 million, 247 lives saved, and a secret my grandmother carried to her grave, turned my family inside out. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday in March, cold enough that the dogwoods hadn't bloomed yet, the morning my grandmother died. The call came at 5:47 a.m. I was still in my apartment near Fort Belvoir, boots by the door, uniform pressed and hanging. A nurse at Richmond Community Hospital, her voice careful, rehearsed, told me Ruth Mercer had passed in the night. Peacefully, no pain. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. My grandmother lived in a small house on the east side of Richmond. Creaking hardwood floors, a vegetable garden she tended every morning before sunrise, the smell of hand-brewed coffee that soaked into the curtains and never left. The house was worth less than my sister's engagement ring. Nobody in my family thought that was strange. I did. She raised me on a phrase I heard so often it became the rhythm of my childhood. Discipline is kindness, Nuri. Kindness to your future self. It was the reason I enlisted. The reason I made it through 18 months in a combat zone, stitching soldiers back together while mortar rounds shook the ground. Everything steady about me started with her. I called my mother first. Diane picked up on the fourth ring. "Well," she said, "she lived a long life. Let me know about the arrangements." That was it. No tears, no silence that meant grief was too heavy for words. Just a transaction. I called my sister Brooke next. Voicemail. I left a message she wouldn't return for 3 days. That evening, I drove to the house. Let myself in with the key she'd given me when I was 16. Sat at her kitchen table. Opened drawers I never had reason to open before. In the nightstand, tucked behind a Bible and a tin of peppermints, I found a yellowed envelope. Handwritten across the front, Arlington, Section 21. Inside was a military ID card, faded and cracked at the edges. The rank read, Captain. She never told me she was a captain. Arlington National Cemetery in March is a place that makes you forget how to breathe. Rows of white headstones stretching toward the horizon like a conversation the living aren't part of. The sky was low and gray. Frost clung to the grass. Section 21, the nurses' section. I learned about it the night before, a portion of the cemetery where military nurses are buried, going back more than a century. My grandmother earned her place among them, and I hadn't even known her rank. My mother didn't come. I have a closing this afternoon, Nuri, you understand. Brooke had a wedding tasting. Chad, her fiancé, apparently couldn't reschedule either, so it was just me, a chaplain with kind eyes, and a 7-person honor guard. They folded the flag with movements so precise it hurt to watch. The chaplain said a prayer. The rifles cracked 3 times across the stillness. When it was over, the honor guard left. The chaplain placed a hand on my shoulder and walked away. I stood alone with the sound of wind through bare branches. Then I heard footsteps on wet grass. A man in his 70s approached from the East Road. He wore a Class A uniform, crisp, dark green, brass gleaming even under overcast sky, 4 stars on each shoulder. I recognized the weight of that rank before I processed anything else. He stopped in front of me and extended his hand. I took it. "Your grandmother saved more lives than most generals I've known," he said. His voice was deep and steady, the kind you'd follow into anything. I'm James Calloway. I served with Ruth a long time ago. He looked at the headstone, then back at me. Fly to Geneva, he said. Give them your grandmother's name. They'll understand. He pressed a business card into my palm and walked away before I could ask what he meant. I drove back to Richmond with the business card on the passenger seat and a question I couldn't put down. That night I told my mother about the general. She laughed. Not cruelly, dismissively, which was worse. Some old man playing soldier at a cemetery, Diane said. Don't waste money flying to Europe, Nuri. You're a lieutenant, not a millionaire. The way she said lieutenant, like it was a consolation prize. I'd deployed to a combat zone. I'd held a 19-year-old private's hand while he bled out waiting for medevac. But to my mother, my service was just a career that didn't come with a corner office. Brooke called the next day. One question. Did Grandma leave anything valuable? Like, in the house? I hung up and opened my laptop. I searched every military database I had access to. Army Nurse Corps rosters, Vietnam-era deployment records, awards registers. Nothing came up under Ruth Mercer beyond standard service documentation. No medals, no commendations, just like she always said. But a 4-star general doesn't show up to a stranger's burial, not without a reason that outweighs his schedule. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. General Calloway answered on the second ring. Ruth served under me in Vietnam, he said. Field Hospital, Pleiku, 1969. She was the best surgical nurse I ever commanded. What she did after the war... He paused. You need to see it for yourself. See what, sir? I can't explain it over the phone, Lieutenant. This is something you see in person. Go to Geneva. There's a foundation near Lake Leman. Give them her name. He wouldn't say more. I stared at the phone for a long time after he hung up. The last thing my grandmother would have wanted was for me to ignore a 4-star general's direct guidance. I used leave days and savings to buy the ticket. 9 hours, Dulles to Geneva. My mother's reaction was predictable. You're throwing away rent money on a wild goose chase, Diane said. Your grandmother lived in a shack, Nuri. There's nothing in Geneva for us. I packed light. The yellowed envelope from the nightstand, the faded captain's ID card, and a small leather notebook I'd found in the house, filled with handwriting I recognized as my grandmother's, some pages in a shorthand I couldn't read. The flight was long enough to doubt everything. Maybe Diane was right. Maybe Calloway was sentimental. Maybe Geneva would be a dead end, and I'd come home with less money and no answers. Then the taxi dropped me at a stone building near Lake Leman. Old European architecture, ivy on the walls, a brass plaque by the door I couldn't read from the car. Inside, the lobby smelled like lemon polish and old paper. A woman behind a mahogany reception desk looked up. Your name? Nuri Mercer. A pause. The woman's fingers stopped moving over her keyboard. And your grandmother's name? Ruth Mercer. Something shifted behind her eyes. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly in French, and set it down. 1 moment, please. 2 minutes passed. A door opened at the far end of the hall. A woman in her late 60s stepped out. Silver hair, gray suit, posture that suggested decades of boardrooms and precision. She crossed the lobby with the measured pace of someone who didn't waste motion. She stopped in front of me and extended her hand. Ms. Mercer, we've been expecting you. She held my grip a beat longer than protocol required. Your grandmother made arrangements. Please, come inside. I followed her down a corridor lined with framed photographs I didn't have time to read, and I understood that whatever waited at the end of this hallway was going to change everything. Her name was Margaret Linden, 68 years old, trust attorney. She'd managed my grandmother's affairs for more than 2 decades, and the way she spoke about Ruth, with precision but also reverence, told me this wasn't a routine client relationship. The conference room had a long walnut table and windows overlooking the lake. Margaret set a leather binder in front of me and opened it to the first page. 22 years ago, she said, your grandmother established an irrevocable charitable trust through this foundation. It was funded by royalties from a patent she co-developed, a field surgical technique for treating blast wound hemorrhaging. The U.S. military adopted it in the late 1980s. The royalties accumulated over 3 decades. I stared at her. The current value of the trust is $12,400,000. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table. The trust's sole purpose, Margaret continued, is to provide financial assistance to veterans facing hardship, surgical procedures, vocational training, housing, emergency support. Over 22 years, it has served 247 individuals. Every case is documented. She turned the binder to a section of records. Names, dates, dollar amounts. Photographs of men and women I'd never met, each one with a story that started in a foxhole or a field hospital and ended with a second chance. Your grandmother designated you as successor trustee, Margaret said. You, and only you, will oversee the trust going forward. Why me? Margaret paused. Then she reached into the binder and removed a sealed envelope. My name on the front. My grandmother's handwriting. She left this for you. She specifically excluded all other family members from any role in this trust. Margaret met my eyes. Her instructions were very clear, Lieutenant. I held the envelope and felt the weight of $12 million I never knew existed pressing against my chest like a second heartbeat. I opened the letter alone in my hotel room overlooking Lake Lemán. The paper was thin, the same stationery she used for grocery lists and birthday cards, nothing fancy. That was Ruth Mercer. Her handwriting was steady, no tremor. She'd written this years ago, when her hands were still sure. Nuri, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've met Margaret. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I kept it from everyone, and I'll explain why. Every dollar I kept for myself was a dollar someone in worse shape didn't get. I saw boys, 18, 19 years old, lose their legs, their sight, their minds in places the world forgot about. The VA tried. It wasn't enough. So I built something that could be. Your mother will want this money. Your sister will want this money. They'll tell you I was confused or selfish, or that blood comes first. Don't believe them. Blood came first for me too. But some debts aren't paid with money. They're paid with discipline. I chose you because you're the only one who understands that. You chose the army when everyone told you not to. You chose hard over easy. That's all I need to know. Don't break this trust. Don't let anyone turn it into something that serves vanity instead of need. Discipline is kindness, Nuri. Kindness to your future self. I love you. Now go do the work. Grandma. I read it 3 times, cried twice. Then I folded it back into the envelope, washed my face, and called Margaret. I'm honoring every word, I said. I expected nothing less, she said. Before I could hang up, my phone buzzed. A text from Brooke. Mom says you went to Europe? Are you insane? We need to talk about Grandma's house. The work was already starting. I landed at Dulles on a Thursday evening. My mother was waiting in my apartment lobby. She'd driven 2 hours from Richmond, which meant she already knew something. Geneva, Diane said, arms crossed. I found your booking confirmation. You left your email logged in on my old laptop. I'd forgotten about that. A mistake I wouldn't repeat. We sat at my kitchen table. I told her the broad truth, the trust, the charitable foundation, my role as successor trustee. I didn't share the letter. Some things belong only to the people they were written for. Diane listened with a stillness I recognized, the same silence she used when calculating commission on a property she wanted badly. How much? She asked. $12 million. Her eyes changed, not wider, sharper, like a lens adjusting. That money belongs to this family, she said. Your grandmother was my mother. It's an irrevocable charitable trust, Mom. It supports wounded veterans. It's not a family inheritance. You're telling me my mother had $12 million? $12 million? And we lived in that dump? And she gave it to strangers? She gave it to people who lost limbs in combat. Diane stood up. Her chair scraped the floor. I grew up embarrassed, Nuri. I lied about where I came from. I wore the same 3 outfits to school because my mother, apparently a millionaire, chose poverty. And you're going to sit here and tell me that money isn't ours? I'm telling you it legally isn't, and morally isn't. Her jaw tightened. Something shifted behind her expression. Not grief, not anger exactly. Strategy. I'll hire a lawyer, she said quietly. We'll see how irrevocable this trust really is. She picked up her purse and left without saying goodbye. The door didn't slam. Diane never slammed doors. She just closed them in a way that made you feel locked out. Brooke called the next morning. She opened sweet. My sister always opened sweet. Nuri, I'm so happy for you. Grandma must have really trusted you. I waited. So, she said, about the wedding. There it was. Brooke had booked Whitfield Country Club for a June ceremony. $40,000 deposited. Another $140,000 outstanding. $180,000 wedding for a couple who financed their engagement ring. Just a small portion of the trust could cover it, Brooke said. Grandma would have wanted her granddaughter to have a beautiful wedding, don't you think? Grandma wanted that money to help wounded veterans. That's exactly what it does. Silence. Then the sweetness curdled. You always acted like you were better than us because you sat in that moldy house with her, playing soldier, playing hero, playing martyr. This is a family matter, Nuri. Playing soldier. I deployed to a combat zone, Brooke. And now you're sitting on $12 million that should be ours. I ended the call. Within 48 hours, the campaign began. Diane called every aunt, uncle, and cousin within reach. Her version of the story spread through the family like fire through dry brush. Nuri is hoarding Ruth's fortune. She won't share a penny with her own mother. No mention of the veterans. No mention of the trust being irrevocable. No mention of Ruth's letter or her wishes. Just a 28-year-old lieutenant who was too selfish to help her family. I called General Calloway that evening, told him everything. I've seen families tear apart over less, he said. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes from decades of command. Document everything, and don't be alone when they confront you. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the silence of my apartment, realizing I was about to fight a war with no uniform and no rules of engagement. 2 weeks after Geneva, my mother staged an intervention. She called it a family dinner. It was a tribunal. The location? Diane's dining room in Richmond. Present. Diane, Brooke, Brooke's fiancé Chad Prescott, my Aunt Vicky, Diane's younger sister, and Uncle Ray, who mostly stared at his plate. Diane had prepared remarks. She actually had notes on index cards. Ruth was mentally unstable in her later years, she said. She clearly wasn't capable of setting up a trust this size. We believe the paperwork may be compromised. Aunt Vicky nodded. Diane's right. Mom always said Ruth was eccentric. I let them finish. Then I spoke. Grandma set up this trust 22 years ago. She was 60 years old. Her doctors confirmed full cognitive capacity. The trust was reviewed annually by a licensed attorney in Geneva and complies with both Swiss law and U.S. tax code. Diane's index cards trembled slightly. You're 28 years old, she said. A first lieutenant making base pay. You think you can manage $12 million? I'm not managing the money, Mom. I'm protecting its purpose. There's a difference. The purpose should be this family. The purpose is 247 veterans who had no one else. The room went quiet. Chad cleared his throat and leaned toward Brooke. He thought he was whispering. Don't worry, he said. My firm has estate lawyers. We'll find a way. I heard every word. I stood up, folded my napkin, and placed it beside my plate. Military habit. You leave a table the way you found it. I love this family, I said. But I will not apologize for honoring my grandmother's wishes, and I won't pretend that wanting her money is the same as missing her. I drove back to Fort Belvoir in the dark, gripping the wheel hard enough to leave marks on my palms. The next morning I woke up at 0500, force of habit, and ran 5 miles on the base track before the sun cleared the trees. Running is how I process. By mile 3, I had a plan. I video called Margaret Linden in Geneva. They're threatening legal action, I said. My mother's hired an attorney. Margaret's expression didn't change. She'd been doing this longer than I'd been alive. The trust is irrevocable and administered under Swiss law with full U.S. compliance, she said. Your mother has no legal standing. Any challenge filed in a Virginia court will be dismissed for lack of jurisdiction over the trust corpus. If they persist, they'll be liable for opposing counsel's fees. She sent me a 4-page summary letter, the kind of document that reads like a polite wall of steel. Use it when you need to, she said. And Nuri, your grandmother anticipated this. She told me, Margaret, my daughter will try to take it. That's why I chose Nuri. Hearing Ruth's words through someone else's voice hollowed me out for a moment. Then I straightened my spine the way she taught me. I spent the next week reaching out to veterans the trust had supported. I needed to understand the full scope of what my grandmother built. Tom Brennan was the first to call back. 62 years old, lost both legs below the knee in combat. The VA covered initial treatment. When he needed advanced prosthetics 3 years later, the funding had dried up. Ruth's trust paid $47,000. Tom was now a master carpenter with his own shop and 3 employees. Your grandmother paid for my legs, Ms. Mercer, he said, his voice cracking. She came to my house every year with apple pie, never told anyone, not even her own family. Brooke's engagement party was in 3 weeks. Diane had already told the social circle that the family recently received a significant inheritance. The fuse was lit. I just didn't know how short it was. So let me pause here. My mother just told everyone in her social circle that we received an inheritance, money that isn't ours. Money that was built to help veterans who lost limbs, livelihoods, everything. And my sister wants to use it for a country club wedding. I need to ask you something. If your grandmother left behind a trust that saved 247 lives, and your family wanted to drain it for a party, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. And if you know someone who's ever had to stand alone against their own family, share this with them. They might need it. Diane hired Greg Spalding, estate attorney, corner office in downtown Richmond, glass desk, framed diplomas. The kind of lawyer who looks expensive because he is. Spalding sent me a formal letter on firm letterhead requesting full disclosure of all trust documentation, fiduciary records, and beneficiary lists. The language was sharp and designed to intimidate. I forwarded it to Margaret. Her response arrived in 48 hours. 4 pages, single-spaced. Every paragraph constructed with the precision of someone who'd spent decades making irrevocable mean irrevocable. The letter acknowledged the inquiry, confirmed the trust's legal standing under Swiss fiduciary law and U.S. Internal Revenue Code Section 501, C.3, equivalent provisions, and concluded with a sentence I read 3 times. Any legal action undertaken without standing will be subject to full recovery of costs, including international counsel fees. Greg Spalding called my mother that afternoon. I know because Brooke texted me about it. Mrs. Mercer, Spalding told Diane, I have to be honest with you. This trust is airtight, Swiss-administered, IRS-compliant, 22 years of clean audits. You'd be spending significant money to lose. Diane's response, relayed through Brooke, find another angle. There was no other angle, but Diane didn't operate on legal logic. She operated on will. 3 days later, Chad Prescott, Brooke's fiancé, financial analyst, country club membership holder, made a phone call to a college buddy named Derek who worked at the Richmond Register. The pitch? A local interest story. Army officer controls secret $12 million fund while her own family struggles. It wasn't true, but truth had never been the point. Chad wanted pressure, social pressure, the kind that doesn't need a courtroom, and I wouldn't learn about it until the damage was already in motion. My mother had always understood audiences. It's what made her good at real estate. She could read a room, shape a narrative, sell a version of reality that made people feel something. She turned those skills on me. The Facebook post appeared on a Tuesday. She didn't use my name directly, She didn't need to. Everyone in her circle knew exactly who she meant. When a mother loses her own mother and then discovers that the inheritance meant for the family is being withheld by someone who refuses to share, you realize family means nothing to some people. Pray for me. 47 likes in 3 hours. Aunt Vicky shared it with a comment. Ruth was suffering toward the end. Someone took advantage of a vulnerable woman. That was a lie. Ruth was sharper at 80 than most people at 50. But lies travel fast when they confirm what people want to believe. The messages started arriving. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, family friends, people from Diane's church group. Nuri, your mom is really hurting. Can't you just give them something? Family is everything. Money isn't worth losing your mother over. I heard your grandmother was confused. Maybe the trust isn't what you think it is. I didn't respond. I went to work, showed up to formation, completed my duties, kept my head level. Then a colleague in my unit pulled me aside after PT. Hey Mercer, I saw your mom's post. My wife follows her. Everything okay? My grandmother helped 247 people in silence. My mother couldn't go 2 days without an audience. That evening, I opened my email. A message from a reporter at the Richmond Register. I'm working on a story about a local military officer who controls a fund established by her grandmother. Would you be available for comment? Chad's fingerprints were all over it. I took a weekend pass and drove 3 hours to Roanoke. Tom Brennan's woodworking shop sat at the end of a gravel road, a converted barn with sawdust on the floor and the smell of fresh-cut oak. A sign over the door read, Brennan Custom Carpentry, 3 employees, a full order board. Tom met me at the entrance, 62 years old, broad shoulders, standing steady on prosthetic legs that moved with practiced ease. His handshake was the strongest I'd felt since Calloway's. So, you're Ruth's granddaughter, he said. The soldier. First lieutenant, combat medic. He smiled. She would have loved that. We sat in his office, a small room with a wood stove and framed photos of finished projects. Tom told me his story without decoration. Infantry, roadside explosive device, both legs below the knee. The VA covered initial treatment and basic prosthetics. When he needed the advanced ones, the kind that let you stand at a workbench 10 hours a day, the funding wasn't there. Your grandmother's trust paid $47,000, he said. I got my legs, built this shop, hired 3 guys, 2 of them vets. He pulled a wooden box from a shelf and opened it. Inside were letters, handwritten, 1 per year, each signed RM, never the full name. She visited every year, Tom said. Brought apple pie, sat right where you're sitting, never wanted credit, never mentioned family. He introduced me to 2 other veterans in the area. Each had a similar story, different wounds, different years, same quiet intervention from a woman who could have lived comfortably and chose not to. Before I left, Tom walked me to my car. He looked at me with an expression I recognized, the look of someone who owes a debt they can never repay. If you ever need people to stand up and say what Ruth did, he said, you call me. I'll bring 50 guys who owe her everything. I drove back to Fort Belvoir knowing I wouldn't have to fight this war alone. Diane found a second attorney, someone less cautious than Greg Spaulding, someone willing to file a challenge in Virginia court on the theory that Ruth lacked testamentary capacity, a long shot wrapped in desperation. The email arrived on a Wednesday evening, copied to Brooke, Chad, Aunt Vicky, and me. Diane's words, but clearly drafted with legal input. Nuri, you have until Brooke's engagement party to agree to a redistribution of the trust assets among immediate family members. If you refuse, we will proceed with legal action in Virginia and cooperate fully with media inquiries regarding the fund's administration. This is your last chance to do the right thing for your family. An ultimatum, delivered like a cease and desist letter to your own daughter. I forwarded it to Margaret. Let them file, Margaret said. Her tone hadn't changed since the first time I called her, measured, unshakable. Virginia courts have no jurisdiction over the trust corpus. It's administered under Swiss law. Any filing will be dismissed, and they'll owe costs. I'll prepare a response. I thanked her. Then I sat with the harder question. Brooke's engagement party was in 10 days. Whitfield Country Club. 80 guests. Champagne. A celebration I'd been invited to before any of this started, back when I was just the younger sister who chose the army over a real career. I could skip it. No one would blame me. Diane had turned it into a battlefield. But I kept hearing Calloway's voice. Don't be alone when they confront you. Then a second thought. Diane had also invited a reporter from the Richmond Register. She wanted the confrontation public. She wanted witnesses to her version. Fine. If she wanted witnesses, I'd bring mine. I wasn't going to hide. I called General Calloway that night. They've given me a deadline, I said. My sister's engagement party. My mother plans to make a speech, publicly, in front of 80 people, accusing me of keeping the trust from the family. She's invited a reporter. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Then, Ruth told me this would happen. She said, James, my daughter will try to take it. That's why I chose Nuri. Sir, I don't want to turn my sister's party into a confrontation. It's already a confrontation, Lieutenant. Your mother made it one the moment she sent that email. All I'm offering is the truth. He was right. Diane had chosen the venue, the audience, the narrative. She'd invited the press. She was counting on me being alone, outgunned, and too loyal to fight back in public. I'll come, Calloway said. And I won't come alone. Only if they go first, I said. I won't ambush my own sister's party. Agreed. If your mother doesn't attack, we're just guests paying respects. He called Tom Brennan. Tom called 4 other veterans the trust had supported. 5 men who owed their livelihoods to Ruth Mercer's quiet generosity. We'll be there by 6, Calloway said. Dress blues. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Military habit. That evening, going through my email, I found something that tightened every muscle in my back. Diane had sent the engagement party invitation to Charlotte Hayes, the reporter from the Richmond Register. Not Derek, Chad's buddy. Charlotte, a real journalist with a real byline. My mother didn't just want social pressure. She wanted a story. The headline she was pitching, a greedy granddaughter keeping a family from its rightful inheritance. She had no idea the story was about to flip. 3 days before the party, Brooke invited me for coffee. Just us sisters, she said. The cafe was in short pump, neutral ground, or so she thought. She started with tears, real ones probably. Brooke had always been good at crying when it served her. This wedding is everything I've dreamed of, she said. Mom and I are drowning in debt. Chad's parents are pulling back. The caterer needs final payment by Friday. I'm not asking you to dismantle the trust, Nuri, just a small portion. Grandma would have understood. I looked at her across the table. When was the last time you visited Grandma? Her mouth opened, closed. She was in a hospital bed for 3 weeks before she died, Brooke. You didn't come once. I was busy with wedding planning. She was dying. Brooke's jaw set. The tears dried faster than they'd come. She was old and boring, Nuri. She had nothing to offer. She lived in a falling-apart house and smelled like coffee grounds. But apparently, she had $12 million, and you're sitting on it like a dragon. There it was, the real Brooke, underneath the tears and the sister talk and the dreams about centerpieces. That money saved 247 veterans' lives, I said. Your wedding budget wouldn't save one. She flinched, then leaned forward. Mom forwarded your email threads about the trust to that reporter. She got them from the laptop. I stared at her. She pulled my private emails? She said it was still her laptop. It was my correspondence about a legal trust. I stood up. Thank you for telling me. Nuri, $12 million, Brooke, and every cent of it goes to people who lost more than you'll ever understand. I walked out. The coffee was still warm. I never went back for it. The night before the party, I drove to my grandmother's house. I let myself in. The air still smelled like coffee and old wood. I sat at her kitchen table, the same spot where she taught me to shuffle cards, where she drilled me on pressure points and tourniquet technique before I ever set foot in combat medic training at Fort Sam Houston, where she said, "Discipline is kindness," so many times it became the architecture of my spine. I opened the leather notebook. Page after page, name after name. In Ruth's careful handwriting, each entry was a life. Tom Brennan, prosthetics, 2004, $47,000. Sarah Oakes, mortgage cleared, 2011, $22,000. David Wren, college fund for children, 2017, $35,000. 247 names. 247 people who went to sleep one night thinking they had nothing left, and woke up because a woman in a small house on the east side of Richmond decided they mattered. I closed the notebook and pressed it against my chest. My phone buzzed. Text from Callaway. "We'll be there by 6, dress blues." Another buzz. Tom Brennan. "Bringing the boys. We're not missing this." Then an email. From Diane. Copied to everyone. "Tomorrow, I'm setting the record straight in front of everyone. You had your chance, Nuri." I set the phone down, looked around the house, the creaking floors, the worn curtains, the vegetable garden visible through the window, dormant in the March cold. This house was worth maybe $90,000. The woman who lived in it gave away $12 million, and the family who ignored her for decades now wanted every cent. I slept in her bed that night. The sheets still smelled faintly like lavender. In the morning, I pressed my Class A uniform and drove to Whitfield Country Club with my grandmother's notebook in my bag, ready for whatever came next. Whitfield Country Club sat on a hill outside Richmond. Old money architecture, white columns, a circular drive lined with dogwoods that hadn't bloomed yet. The kind of place that whispered you either belonged or you didn't. 6:30 p.m., Saturday. 80-plus guests filtered through the double doors into a ballroom dressed for celebration. White flowers on every table. A banner in gold script. Brooke and Chad. Champagne towers. String quartet in the corner playing something I didn't recognize. Diane was everywhere. Sequin dress, hair salon fresh, moving between tables with the energy of a woman running a campaign, not a party. She touched arms, leaned in, laughed on cue. Brooke stood beside Chad near the head table, radiant in a way that required effort to maintain. I arrived in my Class A uniform, dress greens, ribbons above the left breast pocket. It wasn't a power play. I'd come straight from a function at the base, but the uniform changed the way people looked at me, and I knew it. Diane spotted me from across the room. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you actually came," she said. "Brave." I nodded and found a quiet seat near the back. 7 minutes later, a staff member approached me. Young woman, clipboard, slightly flustered. "Ma'am, there are some military gentlemen at the side entrance asking for you." I stood and walked to the service door. General James Callaway, Tom Brennan, 4 other veterans. Callaway in full dress uniform, 4 stars polished to mirrors. Tom in a dark suit, standing straight on prosthetic legs. The others in veterans' formal wear, clean, pressed, medals pinned. "Evening, Lieutenant," Callaway said. "Evening, sir." "Just say the word." "They're with me," I told the staff member. She led them in. A 4-star general walking through a country club ballroom turns heads like gravity. The room noticed. Diane noticed. Charlotte Hayes, the reporter, was already seated near the bar, notebook open. She noticed too. The toasts began at 7:15. Chad's father went first. A gracious 3 minutes about love and new beginnings. Then Chad, who was charming in the way men who practice in mirrors tend to be. Then Diane took the microphone. She started soft. "I want to thank each of you for being here to celebrate Brooke and Chad. Family is the foundation of everything we do, and tonight is a reminder of how much love surrounds this table." Applause, glasses raised, then the shift. "But I also need to address something." Her voice tightened, pitched higher, carrying across the room with the confidence of a woman who'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. As many of you know, our family recently lost my mother, Ruth. And after her passing, we discovered she'd left behind a significant fund. The room went still. Unfortunately, Diane continued, my younger daughter Nuri has decided to keep it all. $12 million. Away from her own mother. Away from her sister. On a night that should be about love and family. She turned toward my table. 80 pairs of eyes followed. I ask you, is that right? Is that what family means? Murmurs rippled through the room. I felt the weight of judgment from people who didn't know a single fact about the trust, Ruth's wishes, or the 247 veterans whose lives depended on that money staying exactly where it was. Brooke stood beside Diane, nodding. Chad whispered something to his buddy Derek near the bar. Charlotte Hayes wrote faster. I just want what's fair, Diane said. For my family. She set the microphone down and looked at me, waiting for me to crumble, to cry, to apologize. I stood up. 3 seconds of silence. Long enough for 80 people to hold their breath. Then I walked toward the microphone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The uniform did half the work. The silence did the rest. My grandmother, Ruth Mercer, was a captain in the United States Army Nurse Corps. I let that land. She served in Vietnam. Field Hospital, Pleiku, 1969. She worked through mortar fire, treated 14 wounded soldiers in a single night, and took shrapnel in her shoulder. She never stopped. She refused a commendation because, her words, medals don't stitch wounds. Nobody moved. After the war, she co-developed a surgical technique for treating blast wound hemorrhaging. The United States military adopted it. The patent royalties, over 30 years, built a fund. I looked at my mother. She was gripping the edge of the table. That fund, $12,400,000, is an irrevocable charitable trust. It exists for one purpose: to support combat veterans who have nowhere else to turn. In 22 years, it has helped 247 people, men and women who lost legs, sight, homes, and hope. I paused, took a breath. I didn't choose to keep it from my family. My grandmother chose to give it to people who needed it more. She lived in a small house. She wore the same coat for 15 years. She brewed her own coffee every morning, not because she had to, because every dollar she didn't spend was a dollar that went to someone who had lost everything in service to this country. The room was silent in a way I'd only experienced in the field, the silence after an explosion, when the air hasn't decided whether to rush back in. I have someone here who can tell you more about what that money meant. I turned toward the side of the room. General Calloway? A 4-star general stood up, and the room understood that everything they'd just been told by my mother was wrong. James Calloway walked to the front of that ballroom like he was crossing a parade ground. Measured steps, shoulders back, 4 stars catching the chandelier light. 80 guests went absolutely still. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I served 38 years in the United States Army. I commanded brigades and divisions. I planned operations that made the evening news. But the bravest person I ever served alongside was a 5'4" nurse named Ruth Mercer. He told them about Pleiku, the night of the mortar attack, 14 casualties in 4 hours, Ruth triaging under fire, her shoulder bleeding through gauze she'd taped herself. She didn't stop until the last soldier was stable. She turned down the Purple Heart, Calloway said. Said she wasn't the one who was wounded. The soldiers were. Then he stepped aside and looked toward the back of the room. Tom Brennan stood up. The room saw his legs, the prosthetics visible below his suit trousers. He didn't try to hide them. My name is Tom Brennan, he said. Ruth Mercer paid for these legs. The VA couldn't. She could. I have a carpentry shop now, 3 employees, 2 of them veterans. A second man stood. David Wren. Ruth's trust paid for my children's college when I couldn't hold a job after 3 deployments. A third. Paul Hessler. She covered my mortgage when I was going through a medical discharge. I'd have been on the street. A fourth. Marcus Cole. She funded my PTSD treatment program. I'm alive because of her. One by one, 5 veterans, 5 lives, 5 debts owed to a woman who died in a house worth $90,000. Someone in the back started clapping, then a table near the window, then the whole room. Not polite applause, the kind that comes from the chest, the kind you can't rehearse. Diane stood frozen at her table. Brooke's face had gone pale. Chad was already outside, phone pressed to his ear. Charlotte Hayes lowered her notebook and stared. The story she'd been invited to write had just evaporated. The real one was standing right in front of her. I stood in that ballroom and watched 5 veterans, men who lost limbs and years and peace of mind, stand up for my grandmother while my own mother couldn't look anyone in the eye. I'll tell you what happened next. But first, if this story made you feel something, hit subscribe. Not for me. For every person out there protecting something good while their own family calls them selfish. And if you've ever been the only one in your family who did the right thing when it cost you everything, drop a comment. I want to hear your story. The applause faded. Diane grabbed the microphone. Her hand was shaking. Her voice cracked on the first word. "This is my mother's money," she said. "Mine. You don't know what it's like growing up with nothing because your own mother chose to be poor." The room went quiet again. But this time the silence wasn't reverent. It was the silence of people watching someone unravel in real time. Calloway stepped forward, not aggressively, the way you'd approach someone on the edge of something. "Ma'am," he said, "your mother chose to be generous. There's a difference." Diane turned on me. Her mascara hadn't smudged yet, but her composure had. "You did this," she said. "You brought them here to humiliate me at my own daughter's party." "You stood at this microphone and told 80 people I'm a thief," I said. "I brought people who know the truth. The truth is she chose strangers over her own daughter. She chose people who were dying." The microphone picked up everything. Every syllable broadcast to 80 witnesses, a reporter, and a 4-star general who had seen worse than this and still flinched. Brooke grabbed Diane's arm. "Mom, stop. Everyone's watching." Diane pulled free, looked around the room, and saw what I saw, faces that had shifted from sympathy to something colder. People setting down their champagne. A woman at the third table picking up her purse. One of Diane's oldest friends, a woman named Carol who'd been in her book club for 15 years, stood up quietly and walked out. 2 more couples followed. Chad reappeared at the door, phone still in hand. His face was the color of old paper. Charlotte Hayes approached me near the dessert table. Her notebook was closed. "Ms. Mercer," she said, "I was invited here to write a different story, but this is the one I'm going to write." The party didn't end. It dissolved. Over the next 30 minutes, the ballroom emptied in slow motion. Most guests stopped to shake the veterans' hands on their way out. Several came to me directly. "We had no idea," one of Brooke's college friends said. "Your grandmother sounds incredible." "I'm sorry about all of this," another woman whispered, glancing toward Diane's table. The wedding coordinator, a sharp-faced woman named Ms. Hargrove, pulled Brooke aside near the kitchen entrance. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read the body language. Clipboard out, pen tapping, the universal posture of someone discussing money that's owed. Chad walked back in, looking like a man who'd just received bad news and was trying to decide who to blame. He went straight to Brooke. "My parents just texted," he said. Not whispering, not anymore. "They're not comfortable coming to the wedding if this is what your family is like." Brooke's face crumpled for a fraction of a second before she rebuilt it. Military spouses do that. Brooke wasn't military, but she was learning fast. Diane sat alone at her table, one champagne glass untouched, staring at the floral centerpiece like it owed her something. I didn't go to her. I stayed with Tom and the veterans. This was the first time they'd met Ruth's granddaughter in person, and they had stories to tell, small ones, quiet ones, the kind Ruth would have preferred. Before he left, Tom reached into his jacket and handed me a small box. I opened it. A purple heart medal. Bronze, enamel, George Washington's profile. Ruth earned this, Tom said. She never picked it up. The VA still had it on file. I pulled some strings. I held it in my palm. It weighed almost nothing. It meant everything. She said she wasn't the one who was wounded, Tom said. But I think she was. Charlotte Hayes published her article 4 days later in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. The headline read, "The Army Nurse Who Gave $12 Million in Silence, and the Granddaughter Who Kept Her Promise." It was the kind of article that makes you set down your coffee and read it twice. Charlotte had done her homework. Interviews with Calloway, Tom, 2 other veterans, Margaret Linden by phone from Geneva. She'd pulled Ruth's military service record and confirmed the patent. She'd spoken to 3 guests at the engagement party, all on the record. The article didn't attack Diane by name. It didn't need to. The contrast between Ruth's quiet generosity and the family's public demand for the money spoke for itself. One paragraph mentioned family members who sought to redirect the trust's charitable assets for personal use. 80 people at that party knew exactly who that meant. The article went digital at 6 a.m. By noon, it had been shared more than 50,000 times. By evening, it was on the front page of 3 military veteran forums and trending on social media under a hashtag I hadn't created and couldn't control. My mother's Facebook post, the one about being abandoned by her own daughter, was still public. The comments section transformed overnight. Strangers who'd read the article flooded it with responses that Diane couldn't delete fast enough. Aunt Vicky called Diane that afternoon. I wasn't on the call, but Brooke told me about it later. "You told me Ruth was senile," Vicky said. "You told me she was confused. You lied to me, Diane, about our own mother." Vicky hung up. Greg Spaulding, the first attorney, the cautious one, called Diane the next morning. "I'm withdrawing from the case," he said, "and I strongly suggest your second attorney does the same." The narrative had flipped, and Diane was standing on the wrong side of it. The fallout reached Brooke 3 days after the article. Chad's parents, Frank and Lydia Prescott, the kind of people who donated to veterans' charities at Christmas and displayed the receipts on their mantle, called Brooke directly. "We love you, sweetheart," Lydia said, "but the way your family behaved at that party, demanding money from a veterans' trust, in front of all those people, we need some distance." Chad said the rest himself, standing in their shared apartment, overnight bag already packed. "I can't start a marriage with this kind of baggage, Brooke. I need time." He didn't say how much time. He didn't need to. The overnight bag said enough. The wedding was postponed indefinitely. Whitfield Country Club retained the $40,000 deposit under the cancellation penalty clause. Ms. Hargrove was sympathetic in the way people are sympathetic when contracts are involved. Brooke called me for the first time in weeks, not to demand, not to strategize, to cry. I listened. I didn't say I told you so. I never would. "I'm sorry this is happening to you, Brooke," I said. "I really am." "It's all falling apart," she whispered. "I know. Can you just fix it?" "I can't break the trust, and I won't pretend what you and Mom did was okay." Long silence. "Mom told me Grandma never loved us," Brooke said. "She said Grandma was cold and selfish. I believed her, Nuri. For 20 years I believed her. Grandma wrote letters to every veteran she helped. She knew their children's names. She visited Tom Brennan every year with apple pie. She never visited us. You never invited her." The line was quiet for a long time. Then Brooke hung up. Not angry, just empty. I set the phone down and looked at the purple heart on my desk. Ruth earned it. Her family never knew. The numbers told the story more clearly than I could. Diane lost 3 real estate clients within the week. In a small market like Richmond's suburban corridor, reputation is currency. When clients Googled her name, the article came up before her listings. One client, a couple relocating from Northern Virginia, emailed to say they'd decided to go in a different direction. The others simply stopped returning calls. Aunt Vicky cut contact entirely, changed her number, unfollowed Diane on every platform. 26 years of sisterhood dissolved in a phone call. Diane's second attorney, the one willing to file the capacity challenge, withdrew after reading the article and the response from Margaret's firm. "This case is unwinnable and reputationally toxic," he told Diane. "I can't attach my name to it." Total financial damage to Diane and Brooke: $40,000 in forfeited wedding deposits, $15,000 in legal fees across 2 attorneys. The engagement, value incalculable, effectively over. On the other side of the ledger, Ruth's trust received $340,000 in unsolicited donations in the 2 weeks following the article. Veterans organizations shared the story across their networks. A retired colonel in Texas sent a check for $25,000 with a note, "For Ruth, I wish I'd known." Callaway introduced me to the National Veterans Advocacy Coalition. They wanted to partner with the Trust on a new housing initiative. Margaret confirmed the paperwork could be structured within the existing charter, and the morning after the article went viral, I received an email from the Trust Advisory Board in Geneva. "We'd like to meet with you next month to discuss expanding the fund's mission." Ruth Mercer built her trust in silence. It took one newspaper article to show the world what silence sounds like when it's worth $12 million. Diane called me at 1:30 in the morning. I was at Fort Belvoir, awake because soldiers learn to sleep light, and my phone never stays far. Her voice was different. No edge, no strategy. Just a woman in her 50s sitting somewhere dark, talking to her daughter. "I grew up in that house, Nuri." I listened. "With nothing. No nice clothes, no field trips. Do you know what it's like when other kids ask why your lunch is always the same? When your mother could have fixed everything and chose not to?" I sat on the edge of my bed. Outside, the base was quiet. "She chose strangers over me," Diane said. "Her own daughter. She had $12 million and she let me go to school ashamed. She chose people who were dying, Mom. I had nothing too. You had a roof, food every day, a mother who came home every night. Some of those veterans didn't even have that." The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing, the uneven rhythm of someone trying not to cry and losing. "She let me grow up embarrassed," Diane said, "and she had the money to fix it." I closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't hear my mother the strategist. I heard the girl who wore the same 3 outfits to school and wondered why her mother never bought new ones. Ruth's choice was right. I believed that. The trust saved 247 lives. But Ruth's choice also cost something, and the person who paid wasn't a stranger in a VA hospital. It was the little girl who grew up in that small house on the east side of Richmond. "I understand why you're angry, Mom," I said. "But I can't undo what Grandma built, and I won't." The call ended without goodbye. Just a click, and then the sound of nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The following Saturday, I drove to Arlington before dawn. Section 21 was empty at that hour. Just me, the headstones, and a mist that sat low on the grass like it wasn't ready to leave. The sun hadn't cleared the tree line, and everything was gray-blue and still. I found Ruth's marker. White marble, simple lettering. Ruth Mercer, Capt Army Nurse Corps, Vietnam. I placed the purple heart at the base of the stone. The metal caught what little light there was. "You earned this, Grandma." I sat down on the grass. It was cold and damp, but I'd sat on worse. I told her everything. About Geneva, about Margaret and the binder with 247 names, about Diane's campaign and the engagement party, and Callaway and Tom standing up in that ballroom, about the article, about the donations pouring in, about the trust growing instead of breaking. "Mom called me last night," I said. "She's hurting, I know, but I won't break my promise." The wind moved through the bare branches above. In a few weeks the dogwoods would bloom. Ruth had planted dogwoods in her yard, the stubborn kind that bloomed late and lasted long. A young soldier walked past on the service road. She noticed the purple heart on the headstone, stopped, and came to attention. A full salute. Held it for 3 seconds, then dropped it and kept walking. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I smiled, stood up, brushed the grass from my uniform. My phone buzzed. A message from Margaret in Geneva. The Trust Advisory Board has confirmed a meeting next month. They'd like to discuss expanding the fund. When can you travel? I looked at Ruth's headstone one more time. Still on mission, Grandma. Then I walked back to my car and drove south. 2 weeks later, I invited my mother for coffee. Not at her house, not at mine. A cafe on Broad Street, public, neutral, well-lit. The kind of place where voices stay level because other people are watching. Diane arrived in a navy blouse and no makeup. I'd never seen her leave the house without makeup. Something had shifted. We ordered. I waited until the cups were down. I'm not going to apologize for honoring Grandma's trust, I said, and I need you to stop telling people I stole from this family. Nuri, the trust is irrevocable. No court, no lawyer, no Facebook post will change that. Margaret's firm has confirmed it. 2 of your own attorneys have confirmed it. This is settled. Diane looked at her coffee, stirred it, didn't drink. But I'm still your daughter, I said, and I want you in my life. If you want me in yours, here are my terms. I'd written them down, not on index cards. That was her method. Just 3 lines in the notebook I carried. 1. No more lies about the trust. Not to family, not to friends, not online. 2. No more pressure, legal, social, or emotional, to redistribute funds that belong to veterans. 3. A genuine acknowledgement that what Grandma built matters, not to me, to her memory. Diane was quiet for a long time, long enough that the couple at the next table finished their scones and left. I don't know if I can do that, she said, not defiant, honest. Then I'll be here when you're ready. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Brief, firm, the way Ruth would have done it. Then I stood up, left money on the table, and walked out into the sunlight. She didn't follow, but she didn't argue either. Sometimes that's the first step. You just don't recognize it yet. Brooke called me on a Thursday evening. Her voice sounded different, lighter and heavier at the same time, the way people sound when they've put something down they've been carrying too long. I went to Grandma's house last week, she said. I set down the report I was reading. First time in a while. 5 years, Brooke said. I sat in her kitchen for an hour. Just sat there. She told me she'd found the letters, not the ones Ruth wrote to Nuri, the ones Ruth wrote to the veterans, drafts, copies, notes in margins, each one addressed by name, each one specific. She knew their children's names, Nuri, every single one. She'd ask about report cards and soccer games. She remembered anniversaries. I didn't say anything. I let her find the words. I called her boring, Brooke said. I said she had nothing to offer, and she was keeping track of 247 families like they were her own. That's who she was, Brooke. I know that now. Silence. Then, quieter. Can I visit the trust? Meet some of the people she helped? I hadn't expected that. Of all the outcomes I'd mapped, because the Army teaches you to plan for contingencies, my sister volunteering to engage with the trust wasn't on the list. Yes, I said. I'd like that. I started volunteering at the VA hospital on Broad Street, she said. Twice a month. Reading to patients mostly. It's hard, but it helps. That would have made Grandma proud. Chad texted last week. Wants to talk. How do you feel about that? Not ready. I need to fix me first. I almost smiled. That sentence, I need to fix me first, was the most Ruth Mercer thing Brooke had ever said. Mom told me for years that Grandma didn't love us, Brooke said softly. I should have gone to that house and asked her myself. You're going now, I said. That counts. The Trust Advisory Board met on a Tuesday afternoon, Geneva time. I joined by secure video from a conference room at Fort Belvoir. My commanding officer had cleared it without hesitation when I explained the purpose. Margaret Linden chaired the session. On screen, General Calloway, 2 financial advisors from the Foundation, and a Veterans Advocacy Director named Claire Weston. Margaret opened with the numbers. Following the media coverage, the Trust received $340,000 in unsolicited contributions. Combined with existing assets and quarterly investment returns, the total fund now stands at $12,740,000. She paused to let that register. The board proposes expanding the Trust's mission to include mental health support for veterans experiencing post-traumatic stress. Given current demand, we project the expanded program could serve an additional 30 to 40 individuals annually. Claire Weston walked through the proposal, partnering with 3 established PTSD treatment centers, covering costs the VA waitlist couldn't reach. Then Margaret looked at me through the screen. As successor trustee, you have the final word, Ms. Mercer. I'd spent the previous week reviewing every document, cross-checking the financials, and speaking with Tom Brennan about what veterans actually needed. I was ready. I support the expansion, I said, and I'd like to propose one addition: a fellowship for military nurses and combat medics entering the field, named the Ruth Mercer Fellowship, funded at $50,000 per year for training and mentorship. The board voted unanimously. Calloway leaned into his camera. Ruth would be proud, Lieutenant. You didn't just protect her trust, you grew it. Margaret added one last note. We received an anonymous donation this morning, $500,000. The donor said they served with Ruth and never got to thank her. I looked at the screen, at the numbers, at the faces of people who understood what my grandmother built. Then I smiled. The first real smile since the morning she died. 3 months after the engagement party, my life had a shape I recognized. I still reported for duty every morning at Fort Belvoir, still wore the uniform, still did the work that Ruth's sacrifice made possible for thousands of soldiers before me and after. I wasn't leaving the Army. My grandmother was a nurse in uniform. I was a medic in uniform. The parallel wasn't lost on me. On weekends, I managed the trust. Review applications, coordinate with Margaret, call Tom Brennan, who'd turned his woodworking shop into a vocational training hub for veterans. The trust funded the expansion. 3 new trainees started in April. I lived in Ruth's house now, fixed the floors, patched the roof, kept the vegetable garden alive, tomatoes and basil and the stubborn rosemary bush she'd planted the year I enlisted. The coffee still brewed the same way, hand-ground, French press, strong enough to make your teeth ache. Brooke and I were in contact, cautious contact, the kind where you're rebuilding a bridge one plank at a time and testing each one before putting weight on it. She volunteered at the VA hospital twice a month. She'd started reading Ruth's notebook, the one with 247 names, and asking me questions about the people in it. Diane was a different story. We weren't estranged, but we weren't close. She'd deleted the Facebook post. She hadn't apologized. She'd stopped threatening legal action, which was progress measured in silence rather than words. One morning, sorting through the Trust's mail at Ruth's kitchen table, I opened an envelope from a VA hospital in San Diego. A letter from a 19-year-old combat medic named Ellie Saunders. Ms. Mercer, the Ruth Mercer Fellowship paid for my training certification. I passed my boards last week. I want to be like your grandmother. Thank you. I pinned the letter to the refrigerator, the same refrigerator where Ruth used to pin my report cards. The list was growing. The National Veterans Advocacy Coalition held its annual gala in Washington, D.C., in a ballroom 3 times the size of Whitfield Country Club. 300 guests. Military officers, congressional representatives, foundation heads, press. They'd asked me to speak. I almost said no. Ruth never would have wanted a spotlight. But then I realized Ruth had spent her whole life making sure other people were seen. Maybe it was time someone saw her. I stood at the podium in my dress uniform. The audience was quiet in a way that felt like an invitation, not an expectation. My grandmother, Ruth Mercer, never asked for a medal, I said. She never asked for a headline. She never asked anyone to notice what she did. She spent 22 years funding surgeries, mortgages, college funds, and second chances for 247 veterans. She did it from a house worth $90,000. She did it wearing the same coat for 15 years, and she did it without telling a single soul. I looked at the room. She asked for one thing, that the people she helped would go on to help others. That's what this trust is. That's what she built. General Calloway rose from his seat and walked to the podium. He carried a plaque, mahogany, brass nameplate. The National Veterans Advocacy Coalition is honored to present the inaugural Ruth Mercer Humanitarian Service Award, he said, recognizing silent service to those who served. He handed it to me. The room stood. 300 people. The applause was different from the engagement party. This wasn't shock or correction. This was recognition. The kind Ruth never wanted but deserved. Tom Brennan sat in the front row, tears running down his face. He didn't wipe them. I held the plaque and felt its weight. Heavier than the Purple Heart, lighter than everything I'd carried to get here. Thank you, Grandma, I said, quietly, just for her. A week after the gala, I was at Ruth's house, Saturday morning, coffee brewing, rain tapping the kitchen window. Someone knocked. I opened the door. Diane stood on the porch in a raincoat, holding a cardboard box against her hip. No makeup again. She looked older than her 55 years, and smaller, like the fight had compressed something inside her. I found this when I was cleaning out the attic, she said. I thought you should have it. I took the box. Inside, under tissue paper, were photographs. Ruth in her Army Nurse Corps uniform, young, straight-backed, almost smiling. Ruth on a tarmac somewhere tropical, stethoscope around her neck. Ruth shaking hands with a man in a colonel's insignia. Ruth in civilian clothes, standing in front of this very house the day she bought it. 1986, penciled on the back. Diane hadn't looked at these in decades, maybe ever. Come in, I said. She hesitated, then stepped across the threshold. It was the first time she'd been inside Ruth's house in 5 years. She stood in the living room and turned slowly. I'd fixed it up, but the bones were the same. The floorboards, the curtains, the shelf where Ruth kept her nursing manuals next to recipe cards. She really loved this place, Diane said. She loved what it represented, a life without pretense. Diane sat down at the kitchen table, the same chair Ruth sat in every morning. I poured her a cup of coffee, hand-ground, French press, Ruth's recipe. She held the cup with both hands and looked at me. I'm not ready to apologize yet, she said. But I'm here. I sat across from her. That's enough for today, Mom. We drank coffee in Ruth's kitchen while the rain came down. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Sometimes presence is the apology. Sometimes showing up is the first word of a sentence you haven't learned to finish yet. Early morning, the first week of May. I sat at Ruth's kitchen table, my kitchen table now, though I still thought of it as hers, and opened the leather notebook. 247 names in her handwriting, each one a person she chose over comfort, each one a debt she paid to people the world had forgotten. I turned to the next blank page, took a pen. 248. Ellie Saunders, Ruth Mercer Fellowship, Training Certification, 2025. The first name in my handwriting, in a notebook full of hers. The list was continuing. Outside, the dogwoods had finally bloomed. Late, the way they always did in Virginia. White blossoms against dark branches, quiet and stubborn and lasting. Ruth planted them the year I was born. She said they'd bloom when they were ready and not a day before. I closed the notebook and slid it into my bag next to the summary letter from Margaret, the Purple Heart, in its velvet box, and the letter Ruth wrote me in Geneva. Then I pulled on my uniform. Boots laced tight, cover squared. The face in the hallway mirror looked like someone my grandmother would have recognized, not because of the rank or the ribbons, but because of what was behind the eyes. Before I walked out, I stopped at the framed photograph on the hallway shelf. Ruth in her army greens, young and steady, looking directly at the camera like she was daring the world to underestimate her. I touched the frame. 248 now, Grandma. I opened the front door. The May air was warm and clean, smelling like cut grass and dogwood blossoms. A Carolina wren was singing from the rosemary bush, loud and certain, the way small things are when they don't know they're small. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and walked toward the day like a woman who knew exactly what she was carrying and why. Discipline is kindness, kindness to your future self. She told me that my whole life. I finally understand what she meant. That's my story. My grandmother lived like she had nothing because she gave everything to people who had less. My family wanted her money. I chose her mission. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone in your life who gave without asking for credit, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. And here's a question. If you had to choose between keeping the peace with your family and protecting something that mattered, what would you do? Option A, protect the mission. Option B, keep the peace. Tell me below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. There are more stories in the description. People like you and me, standing up when it costs everything. Thank you for staying until the end.